In this presentation, you will learn about Neoevolutionism. Neoevolutionism, as a social theory, attempts to explain the evolution of societies by drawing on Charles Darwin's theory of evolution while discarding some dogmas of the previous theories of social evolutionism. New evolutionary anthropological thought emerged in the 1940s in the work of the American anthropologists Leslie A. White, Julian H. Stewart, and others. It developed extensively in the period after the Second World War and was incorporated into anthropology as well as into sociology in the 1960s. Neo-evolutionary anthropology developed in the mid-20th century as a response to the need to develop theories that better explain cultural differences, similarities, and the processes of culture change. While the 19th century cultural evolutionism attempted to explain how culture develops by describing general principles of its evolutionary process, historical particularism dismissed it as unscientific in the early 20th century. New evolutionary thinkers brought back evolutionary ideas and developed them, with the result that these became acceptable to contemporary anthropology. Neo evolutionism discards many ideas of classical social evolutionism. Neo-evolutionism is a 20th century perspective on the evolution of society. In contemporary neo-evolutionism, there are two main currents of thought. These are universal evolutionism of V. Gordon Childe and Leslie White, and the second one is multilinear evolutionism of Julian Stewart. V. Gordon Childe. V. Gordon Childe was a trained archaeologist and he described evolution of culture in terms of three major events, which are invention of food production, urbanization, and industrialization. He presented an overall view of evolutionary process by analyzing the transitions that took place under the impact of these major events and delineated its common factors. Child's order of evolution differed from those of 19th century evolutionists. According to him, a drastic change in the life pattern of mankind appeared in the stage of civilization in which an aggressive attitude towards environment developed among mankind. First, dwellers or cave dwellers became house dwellers. Hunters and gatherers became food producers by adopting agriculture. Writing made them capable of preserving their tradition, and mathematics came into being for counting things. The development of cities made them urbanized, and technological advancements made them capable of producing durable utensils and implements. Thus, according to him, at each stage of cultural development, mankind developed their technological skills to exploit natural resources. In the early stage, less advanced technological skill had made them less aggressive towards environment, but as knowledge accumulated, they became more and more aggressive. Gordon Childe made an attempt to apply the Darwinian formula to cultural evolution and said variation is seen as invention, hereditary as learning, and diffusion, and adaptation and selection as cultural adaptation and choice. He sought an explanation for the universal laws of cultural change, recognizing that all universal laws do change in the course of history. The scheme of neo-evolution proposed by Child is fraught with limitations, which are as follows. Firstly, he did not differentiate between the old hunters and the hunter gatherers of today, despite the fact that there is a significant difference between the possession, types, and application of technology used for hunting. Secondly, there was too much emphasis on archaeological data as an explanation for cultural evolution. Thirdly, he categorically rejected the idea of universal precedence of matriarchy, sexual communism, etc., an argument put forth by the classical evolutionists. In other words, Child relied too much on archaeological data to explain cultural evolution, and secondly, he did not take any interest in the civilizational sequence outside Middle East and Europe. Thirdly, he did not take into consideration the universal existing institutions of matriarchy, sexual promiscuity, etc. But despite such criticisms, he was successful in presenting universal scheme of cultural evolution in terms of archaeological sequences. Despite the weaknesses, Child is credited for introducing the theory of technological determinism in the study of cultural evolution. Leslie A. White, Theory of Cultural Evolution. Leslie White developed the theory of cultural evolution, which was at that time ignored by most anthropologists. White was impressed by Morgan's model and logic of his evolutionary theory, which prompted him to restore the evolutionary topic started in 1920s. After careful study of the 19th century evolutionist literature, White concluded that evolutionism was not wrong in theory, and that cultural evolution was just as real and demonstrable as biological evolution. White developed the basic law of cultural evolution, that is, culture evolves as the amount of energy harnessed per capita per year is increased. White claims that industrialized cultures and complex societies are more advanced because they have the capacity to harness more energy, thermodynamics, than non industrialized and simple societies. In other words, a more advanced technology gives humans control over more energy, and cultures expand and change as a result. White treated societies as entities that evolved in relation to the amount of energy captured and used by each member of society. This energy is directed towards the production of resources for their survival. While explaining cultural evolution, White believed that culture has general laws of its own. The task of the anthropologist is to discover those principles and explain the particular phenomena of culture. He termed this as the culturology approach, which attempts to define and predict cultural phenomena by understanding general patterns of culture. White assumed that the greater the energy, the more highly evolved the socio-cultural system. White perceived three cultural subsystems: technological, sociological, and ideological. The way society uses its technology to sustain life influences the sociological and ideological systems. Technology, and therefore culture, evolve as more energy is harnessed. White's hypothesis of cultural evolution explained the differences in technology and energy production. He hypothesized, for example, in the first stage, that small scale hunting and gathering societies had not developed complex socio-cultural systems because they depended primarily on human energy for production. Their societies were simple and undeveloped due to limited energy resources. However, socio-cultural systems changed dramatically following the second stage, the capture of energy through the domestication of plants and animals. third stage is the technological changes as the result of the agricultural revolution led to the emergence of cities, complex states, powerful political and religious elite, and new ideologies. According to White, the changes in the agricultural societies had been gradual, taking several thousand years till the fourth stage of the Industrial Revolution. But the Industrial Revolution has taken less than 500 years to produce widespread global transformation, which is accompanied by the fifth stage, wherein nuclear energy is harnessed. White focused on socio-cultural change on the global level rather than on particular societies. So his approach has been called general evolution. His main contribution was that he provided scientific insights to the evolution of culture. White's orientation has been criticized for the same reasons that the ideas of Tyler and Morgan were. In the process of describing what has happened in the evolution of human culture, White assumed that cultural evolution is determined strictly by conditions inside the culture, predominantly technological conditions. In other words, he categorically denied the possibility of environmental, historical, or psychological influences on cultural evolution. The problem with such an argument is that it does not have the potentiality to explain why some cultures evolve, whereas others either do not evolve or become extinct. Additionally, White's theory of energy capture does not answer the question as to why only some cultures are able to increase their energy capture. Julian Stewart, multilinear evolutionist. Multilinear evolution is a methodology based on assumption that significant regularities or parallels occur in cultural change and is concerned with the determination of cultural laws. Multilinear evolutionism is proposed by Julian Stewart. He elaborates his theory of new evolution in his famous book, Theory of Culture Change, published in 1955. He referred to himself as the universal evolutionist as he placed general stages of evolution applicable to mankind as a whole and not of specific or particular culture. Stewart proposed his theory of multilinear evolutionism in order to reconcile evolutionary theory with the growing evidence of cultural and social diversity available as a result of the advances of modern ethnography and cross cultural comparative studies. He, for the first time, gave a broad typology of evolutionists on the basis of his methodological study of different culture areas of the world. Stewart defined cultural evolution as a quest for cultural regularities or laws and added that there are three distinct ways in which evolutionary data may be handled. Unilinear evolution is the formulation put forth by 19th century classical evolutionists which deal with particular culture rather than with cultures. According to Stewart, unilinear evolutionists are those that refer to cultural evolution in terms of three stages: savagery, barbarism, and civilization. Tyler, Morgan, and others were the theorists who supported this scheme of cultural evolution. Stewart observes that new empirical, ethnographic, and archaeological research that concerns the history of individual culture has emerged in recent times. This research is relevant as it recognizes significant patterns and processes of change in particular cases. Universal evolution is an arbitrary term to refer to the remodeling of the unilinear evolution. Julian Stewart pointed out that universal evolution is represented by V. Gordon Childe and Leslie White and is the heritage of the 19th century evolution. These theorists emphasized on evolutionary concept of cultural stages by relating these stages to the culture of mankind as a whole. The distinctive cultural traditions and the local variations of the culture areas and sub-areas which have emerged as the byproduct of special environments are excluded as irrelevant. Multilinear evolution emphasizes on multiple developmental sequences. The distinguishing feature is that it searches parallel of limited occurrence instead of universals. Stewart does not believe that culture followed a single line of development. His generalizations are based on intensive study of particular cultures. For him, multilinear evolution is a methodology based on the assumption that regularities in culture change occur. This is concerned with historical reconstruction with any set laws. Stewart's evolutionary theory, cultural ecology, is based on the idea that the environmental resources available to a people determine their social system. He outlines three basic steps for a cultural ecological investigation. First, the analysis of the relationship between subsistence strategies and natural resources. Second, the analysis of behavior patterns involved in a particular subsistence strategy. Third, the analysis of how other aspects of the society are determined by and impacted by these behavior patterns. The principal concern of cultural ecology is to determine whether cultural adaptations towards the natural environment bring about social transformations of evolutionary change. Although Stewart did not believe in one universal path of cultural evolution, he argued that different societies can independently develop parallel features. Stewart's evolutionary theory is called multilinear evolution because the theory is based on the idea that there are varied patterns of progress towards cultural complexity. In other words, Stewart did not assume universal evolutionary stages that apply to all societies. Neo-evolutionary theories are based on empirical evidence from fields such as archaeology, paleontology, and historiography. Neo-evolutionism is considered to be object and a simply descriptive approach, eliminating any references to a moral or cultural system of values. While the 19th century social evolutionism used value judgments and assumptions when interpreting data, neo-evolutionism relies on measurable information for analyzing the process of cultural evolution. In the years since White's and Stewart's seminal work, neo-evolutionary approaches have been accepted, rejected, challenged, and revised. They continue to generate a lively controversy among those interested in long-term cultural and social change. Thank you for watching the presentation. Do like, subscribe, share, and leave your comments about this presentation or any other topics you would like to learn more about.